Continuing to work with people always creates conflict. Conflict is a topic that will never end. There will always be conflict between people because the way we see things and the way others see things just aren't the same. As most of you know, in my journey to explore and write the book, Half the World's on Acid, what I've come to the conclusion of is that we see the world through our lens, and sometimes we don't connect with the way others see it, which that will just automatically create conflict. So let's talk about conflict. How do we manage? We will never stop conflict, but how do we manage through conflict in the most effective ways? Well, here are a couple things to think about as you think about conflict. Number one is, how can we build confidence, competence, and comfort dealing with conflict? How do we make sure that when conflict arises in our lives, that we have those 3 C's and are setting ourselves up for the highest probability of success? So let's double click on that. The first thing is building the right skill set. Building the right skill set and understanding that there are 2 types of conflict. 1 is reactive and 2 is proactive. How do we handle it when somebody comes at us and they're heated? And how do we handle it when we know we have to have a difficult conversation or handle conflict in a way that might not be comfortable? So skill set is number 1. Number 2, how do we build the 3 C's, is we have the right mindset around conflict. And I wanna walk through some of this as we unfold in this video. Let me start with mindset. I think the first thing is a lot of times we convince ourselves that the other person is not going to be receptive. I think it's not about having the conversation. I think the number 1 thing is the courage to have the conversation. I promise you, most of the time, the conversation will not be as bad as we built it up to be in our own mind. I'm a living example of that. I've worked with thousands of people who handle conflict on an everyday basis, and most of the time, through our empirical research, the conversation isn't as hard as we create it. So sometimes it's just the courage to have that. We will convince ourselves that they don't want to hear it. We will convince ourselves that we might as well beat our head up against the wall. We will convince ourselves that they're not open to our ideas. We will have every excuse in the world to not have the conversation because we have to make ourselves feel comfortable. And the difference between human beings and animals is we can justify anything. We can justify why we're not having that conversation. So when it comes to mindset, number 1 is get out of your own way. Most of our wounds are self-inflicted in that area. So get out of your own way. Number 2, have the mindset of, how do I work this and leave them encouraged, not discouraged, when I'm having these difficult conversations? How do I just have the courage to approach and have an open mind on how they might react? So thinking about that, but not seeing it in the negative, seeing it in the positive. Maybe they've been waiting for me to have this conversation. Maybe they've been thinking about having the conversation with me and they have maybe not had the courage to have the conversation. So a lot of times just getting that weight off our shoulders, there could be a lot of positive outcomes, and you can recenter or reset and move forward in an encouraging way, not a discouraging way. And then number 3, when it comes to mindset, is ultimately making sure that we are prepared to handle anything that might come our way. So we have to think through this. We have to prep and prepare and understand how they might react, how we might react, and how do we handle our own emotions as we go through that. So that's when we have to have a difficult conversation. Let's talk about mindset when conflict finds us. What happens when somebody approaches us and they're frustrated? What happens when somebody has they're confused or they're upset with us? How do we mentally absorb it? And I think that is another key, because I think they are going to take our cues and they're going to react however we act. So when conflict comes to us, I think instead of getting defensive, instead of trying to defend, I think we have the very first step in our own mental mindset is just to absorb it. Just to really understand where they're coming from and not try to see it through our lens, but try to see it through their lens. There's a huge difference between perception and perspective. The CIA did a study and said 98% of people operate in perception. They live life the way they see it versus trying to live. Perspective is seeing it through the other person's lens and just at least trying to understand. So when conflict finds us, the mentality is, how do I just absorb it? How do I not get defensive? How do I not try to justify? But how do I just absorb these things as we go? So those are some of the things with mindset. So 1, if I have to have it, have the courage to have it. understand what might happen in that interaction and how do I handle that? How do I handle my own emotions? And then 3, how do I try to set it up for the highest probability of success and seeing the positive of leaving it encouraged, not discouraged as we go. When it comes to skill set, let's dive into that just a little bit. So with skill set, remember there's reactive and there's proactive. With proactive, I have to begin to build my skill set of how I position the message. How am I going to position the message I'm not trying to skirt the issue. I'm not trying to I'm not trying to mask it, but how do I position it in a way that I believe is going to be the best possible way for the other person or people to absorb the message? So positioning is a skill. How do I position the message versus just blunting it out? Number 2 is there's a skill of it's not what you say, it's how you say it, right? What's my demeanor when I'm delivering that message? Number 3 is how am I creating a conversation? How am I creating a dialogue around that conflict, not just an interrogation or just a monologue where I'm just puking on them all the reasons that I'm frustrated with them or all the reasons why this conflict is there in the first place? How am I skilled at creating a conversation and a dialogue that involves them, that they feel like we're walking together? I'm not pushing against them. That's a lot of times why conflict always tends, the emotions continue to get high, because it feels like you're on one side, I'm on the other. We're kind of verbally shooting bullets back and forth, and I'm hoping mine lands first. How do I get you on my side of the table? How do I dissipate your emotion and let you see that even though this is a challenging issue, we're approaching it in a way that I want to create a win-win scenario. So that's a skill set. Another skill set, and I mentioned kind of a mindset which kind of overlaps, is I need to manage my own emotions. I need to realize my style and how I act or react in times of stress. Some people in times of stress, they'll just shut down. They'll just stop communicating. If that's me, how do I challenge myself to stay engaged and make sure that I have the confidence, courage, competence, comfort to continue to have that conversation? Some people will just they'll just acquiesce and go along. They'll just they'll just agree. If you're really not agreeable, how do I challenge myself not to agree? Again, be professional, position my message in the right way, but how do I make sure that I'm actually not just creating more frustration or longer term frustration because I don't want to handle it in the moment? Some people will immediately, their emotions will go from 0 to 100. Right? If that's me, how do I manage that emotion? How do I not necessarily go from 0 to 100, because that might derail the entire conversation? And some people might just command or take over. They'll just really just hijack the microphone and completely take over the conversation. So it's a skill set to understand how to manage that emotion. And then the other skill set is, which again, it's another mindset thing, but the other skill set is managing the other person's emotion. How am I staying calm through this? How is my demeanor portraying onto them? We always say that attitude's contagious. How is my attitude allowing them to show up in a way that creates an opportunity to actually have an authentic, sincere conversation that can move the conflict forward? Another skill set is making sure that the conflict is resolved. How am I making sure at the end of this conversation that there is clarity and alignment on who's going to do what by when? How are we going to move forward from here? What are the expectations? Are we aligned to those expectations? And how do we make sure we stop the conflict now and not look backwards, but look forwards? I always say we can't change the past. We can only impact and influence the future. So when it comes to a proactive conversation, those are some of the areas that I need to pay attention to. Those are some of the things I have to prep. By the way, if you want to prep for a difficult conversation, proactive or reactive, we have a worksheet on the designleader.com you can download. I think it's free, that will help you plan and prepare for these things. So let me just kind of put a finalization on this proactive. So you have to think about who's involved in the conversation and what's the best way to position the message. You have to think about why you're even having this conversation. What are the goals you're hoping to get out of the conversation? What are ideas to stop the conflict? How do you create a conversation? What are the things that you want to maybe raise your hand and bring to the table and fall on the sword for, because you maybe have added fuel to this fire and it's not just all about a blame game. Maybe it's taking some responsibility from yourself. So again, there's an entire worksheet if you want to download it at designleader.com that will help you impact this. On the reactive side, what's the skill set? Well, I talked about it kind of mentally, but how do I really find the root cause? How do I get the other person to open up to tell me why they're really upset or what caused this? Because a lot of times there might be a myriad of factors. There might be a lot of variables in this. But what am I doing to really understand what was the reason why they finally came to me? And how do I make sure that I'm dealing with that root cause? And that's a skill set, right? I have to engage them. I have to, we call it tides, but I have to let them empty their bucket. I have to, put the microphone back in their hands with the tell me more, please explain, or in what ways, or describe that for me. So there's a lot of things I can do to make sure that before I'm just jumping or reacting, I'm really understanding it and I'm allowing them to empty their bucket and really get all their thoughts on the table before I even respond. That's a skill set. The next thing that I got to do after I really understand and clarify, I have to make sure that I truly understand it. So there's a skill set to reposition that message or restate that message to make sure that that person truly understands that I've listened to them and I understand their position. I want to make sure that I have it right before we even move forward. I have to, again, make sure that we've exhausted everything before we move on and try to solve it. There's a skill set in there to understand if there's a myriad of issues, which one do they really want to start with? Right? Which one is really weighing the heaviest on their mind? Which one really caused them to kind of boil over this time? And I call it finding the big X, right? There might be 5 X's that they're upset about. And if I deal with one of their little X's, the big X, that big thing, that big challenge that they're having is still hanging over their head. But if I can find the big X and we can solve the big X, not all the time, but a lot of times those little X's just go away because they're not as important to them. That's not the reason why that they boiled over or that their frustration is really high. So there's a skill set in that, in solving that big X. And then there's a skill set in creating closure, right? What are the next steps? How do we make sure we avoid this moving forward? What are the pitfalls that allowed us to get here? And how do we make sure we shore up those gaps? How do we not continue to put this thing on repeat where they feel like it's a hamster wheel and it continues to add their frustration, or they continue to create confusion, or they continue to be upset about this, right? So conflict, that way, there's a skill set on both sides of this. Ultimately, conflict is not gonna go away. But if we can help you build the 3 C's, right? More confidence, comfort, and competence. If we can help you have the right mindset, if we can help you have the right skill set, it's not that you can avoid it, but you'll be in a better position to approach it, to handle it, to finalize it, and to move on. And I will tell you that sometimes conflict is the best thing that can happen, or not, let me put it this way, I will promise you that sometimes handling the conflict is the best thing that can happen in any relationship, personally or professionally. Because if it's out there and the elephant's in the room and we never, ever deal with it, it's going to continue to grow and get bigger and cause more issues and more challenges as we go. So when it comes to conflict, what's your area of opportunity? I know we all have them, me included. What's that one thing? Do you need to just have the courage to have the conversations? Do you need to get better at positioning those conversations? Do you need to do both of those things? What are those things that you know that are conflicts in your world right now that you could proactively tackle, that you believe would set yourself up for a higher probability of success and ease your own stress and manage your own frustrations that you have on your end? Whatever that is, do something today, go make an impact, reduce the conflict, and watch things get better naturally. Best of luck.